Cult mom Lori Vallow Daybell wants to represent herself, and I think I've figured out the psychology behind why. It's so simple, it's like looking behind the curtain in Oz to see the reality rather than looking at the big image in front of our eyes. What is that, you wonder? The prosecutors during Lori's first trial said her crimes were driven by money, power, and sex. But I think it's more simple than even those three things. Let me explain. I followed every step of this case, Lori Vallow Daybell, Chad Daybell, all the things since the first report of the two children that were missing in Idaho. The news made it all the way to where I lived in Nebraska, and it intrigued me because I was born and raised in Idaho, and let's just, over the course of time, found out that I had people that I knew that were tied in with this. But that's a whole different story. Many times I'm convinced that Lori knows exactly what she's doing and manipulating all along the way, using the cult beliefs to move her forward to get her end goal of sex, money, and power, as the prosecutors presented during her trial for her motives for murdering her children. But I think they left one key element out. Well, it's kind of the overarching, all encompassing element. What is that? In my opinion, it's the most significant driving force behind everything she's done, and it's even bigger than any of the others.
Hear me out and see if you agree with my assessment.
No doubt she's been diagnosed with mental illness, and I'll tell you her diagnosis in a minute. Sex, power, and money help feed this mental illness, but they're never enough. So she turns to bigger and bigger things, which ultimately even include murder of her children to feed the hungry wolf in her personality. Many serial killers do the same thing. What is the missing element that feeds the hungry wolf, you might ask? I'll tell you in a minute, but first let me give you the background, just in case you aren't familiar with this case. Lori is currently undergoing her third mental evaluation, and her trial in Arizona has been vacated, which means it's taken off the docket until further notice. Her attorneys have asked to be released, and she's asked to be able to represent herself in the case against her for orchestrating the alleged murder of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, as well as the attempted murder of her niece, Melanie Pulowski's husband at the time, Brandon Boudreaux. A self representation option during Lori's trial in Arizona should not come as a shock to us. Let's face it, she has nothing to lose and everything to gain. What will she gain, you might ask? Well, let's back the truck up for a minute. Lori has already been found guilty in Idaho, so she'll spend the rest of her life behind bars. A life without parole. So the trial in Arizona might as well be a time for Lori to feed the hungry wolf inside of her. Some might consider Lori's choice to represent herself in a high profile murder trial as an unexpected turn, but based on her known diagnosis of personality disorders, that are many, I'm not surprised in the least. Lori is a person with a history of seeking attention and adoration. She's already been convicted of killing two of her children, as well as her fifth husband's wife, Tammy Daybell. Convicted, trial over, done. These heinous crimes are just some of the crimes she's accused of. Her trial in Arizona is still pending. The biggest problem about her previous trial was her attorneys convinced her that she should remain silent. Remaining silent doesn't fill the gas tank for her. She was silent other than her statement at her sentencing. In order to fill Lori's gas tank, she's hoping to be given the right to represent herself. The judge has not yet ruled on whether or not he will grant her that right. For the third time, she is under mental health evaluations. If you remember, in Idaho before her trial, she underwent 2 separate mental evaluations before she became fit to stand trial. The standard for determining if a defendant is mentally fit to stand trial is determined by a few tests. The court needs to know whether the defendant has the ability to understand the proceedings against them and to help in their defense. The judge will make this determination after reviewing mental health reports and other evidence. A defendant is considered incompetent if they're unable to, I'm going to give you the list, understand the nature of the legal proceedings, assist in their legal counsel, understand who the people in the courtroom are and why they are there, understand what they are charged with, understand what kind of pleas they can enter, understand what can happen to them if they plead guilty. I mean, a defendant cannot waive their right to be fit to stand trial, and a case can't proceed until they are deemed competent. If a defendant is found incompetent, the case will be put on hold while the defendant's competency is restored. In Idaho, there's no innocent by reason of insanity plea, but Arizona doesn't have the same standard as Idaho. In Lori's case, if I was going to take a guess at which of these standards keeps getting in the way of moving forward in a courtroom, I'm going to guess that it's this one: the ability to assist in their legal counsel. Why? I'm going to explain. With her mental illnesses, is she really truly fit to represent herself or to even assist in her representation with her attorneys? Is she fit? Will she be able to assist with her own defense? Let's talk about what her diagnosis is, and this will help you to comprehend and understand where the courts are coming from. In February 2023, a psychiatric assessment of Lori Vallow revealed she suffers from, get ready for this, delusional disorder intertwined with hyper-religiosity and an unspecified personal disorder with narcissistic features. So basically 3 intertwining mental disabilities, mental issues, whatever you want to call it. With these traits, is she caught up in her own mystical stories that she's unable or unwilling to see the reality of the evidence? And so she's therefore deemed incompetent? I mean, is her need to feed the wolf so intense that she isn't capable of reality anymore? Let's talk about what is the elephant in the room that keeps landing Lori in a mental health facility. We know her diagnosis. Is she really incapable of seeing that white is white and black is black because her need for her delusions is so fierce? As I was listening to her second jail phone call to her son Colby, it finally hit me like a ton of bricks. In my opinion, Lori's heart doesn't get pumping under normal everyday circumstances. I feel like in order for her to feel emotion, she needs aggravating circumstances. Again, this is my opinion. In her case, she needs to hurt the ones she should be protecting. And then the heart gets going. When Lori went on and on about how Colby was the only one who really deserved to know the truth of what happened to Tylee and JJ, it was ridiculous. You take her first phone call that they actually used in court against her with Colby, and she started laughing when he talked about what was happening with his siblings, how they were murdered. She laughed. And now in her second phone call, she's doing this. Oh, Colby, I love you so much. You're the only one who really loved these children, so you need to know the truth behind them. But the problem with this narrative is by her saying what she said, which is so ridiculous, that Tylee was the one who unlived, trying to keep the word out, JJ, and then unlived herself. It's just a way to hurt Colby even more. So the idea that, oh, because you're the one that loved him, I'm going to tell you the truth. No, he's the one that would be hurt the most by this revelation. And her psychopathy, just the amount of narcissism, makes it so she can't even comprehend because she just wants her heart beating. That's my opinion. I mean, she came up with this whole concocted truth that didn't match any evidence, by the way, and it was used to serve her needs of feeding the hungry wolf inside her. Again, this is my opinion, but when you take psychology and the psychology behind narcissistic traits and you put them together, added with her concocted truth, I mean, it's crazy. And what's even more amazing was her ridiculous truth, in my opinion, wasn't even meant to prove her innocence. That wasn't her plan at all with her phone call because she's already proved to be guilty. The whole reason for that great big story was to hurt Colby more. Beep, 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 beep. She's got to get that heart going. I do think she did it. She hurt Colby to the core, and that makes her happy and feeds her wolf. Now, if she can do this in the courtroom, think of all the victims she can then see being victimized by her again. She's getting fed, fed, fed. So, what is this element that I'm talking about that Lori so desperately desires? It is as simple as narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply feeds the wolf inside her.
Let's break down narcissistic supply when it comes to Lori Vallow Daybell. Narcissistic supply is any type of attention that a narcissist seeks, whether it's positive or negative. Narcissists love recognition. That helps them get their supply. Fame, infamy, stardom, and other forms of public attention. Feed, feed, feed. Praise is another form of supply. Admiration, applause, and other forms of interpersonal attention. Fear and repulsion create supply. These can also be a source. Let's face it, narcissistic supply is more about the narcissist's perception of attention than the truth of the attention itself. Their delusions are whatever they create them to be. As long as the narcissist receives the reaction they expect, the connotation of the attention doesn't matter. People with a narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, often have an excessive need for admiration and a lack of empathy for anyone, really. Empathy is expected just for themselves. They may also be described as cocky, manipulative, selfish, patronizing, and demanding.
And narcissistic supply feeds all narcissistic people. And how they go about getting their supply is what turns somebody from a narcissist to a serial killer when they go past that point. All the things Lori does in her life, in my opinion, is to feed her narcissistic supply. And I think it's probably been going on her whole life. But pretty soon everything wasn't enough. So she needed more. She wasn't able to feel that excitement that she gets by seeing someone hurt. I mean, there's even been speculation that she had Munchausen syndrome, so she was hurting Tylee for years and years and years. But then that wasn't enough. Only when she's hurting someone to their core does Lori's heart beat faster. She actually feels something that brings her so much pleasure. I mean, let me give you an example. I went to court a few times in Lori's trial, and one time in particular, it was what I would consider the worst day of the whole trial. And in fact, I've seen so many interviews of different people, including everybody from attorneys to victims to police, investigators, everybody, no matter who you talk to, always say that there was one day in the court that was the worst day of all. And that was the day that the evidence of the children's body was revealed. That happens to be the day I was in court. It was really interesting because, first of all, Lori didn't want to go to court that day. So she threw a tantrum in the hall, and court was delayed because she didn't want to go. They forced her in. And then she was in the courtroom. Well, the judge also didn't want all the people that were in the court that day to see the evidence. I mean, on the monitors, and all the attorneys and Lori and the jurors and of course the judge all were going to need to see the evidence, but he didn't want the rest of us in the courtroom to have to see it. So he had them turn the monitors around, and the attorneys actually came around and sat on the other side of the table that day during that part of the testimony. Because of that, where I was sitting, I had a direct line of sight to Lori the entire time. There was nothing in the way. And she put her hair down and she had tissues and she pretended to cry once in a while. And the jurors were clear across the room. And I will just say this, there were jurors crying. It was upsetting. It was awful. But this is the one thing that I noticed. I kept my eye on Lori the whole time. And I was looking, are those real tears? Is her tissue getting wet at all? And the answer was no. There was no wet tissue. Not only was there no wet tissue, but the entire time when these horrible images were uploaded, everyone in that courtroom had to look away. Everyone was reacting to the atrocities they were seeing, except one person, and that was Lori. She couldn't stop looking. She didn't take her eyes off it. She looked and looked and looked and held her eyes down so that the jurors couldn't see what she was really feeling, which was heartbeat. She's getting a reaction. She's getting narcissistic supply. It was deplorable. And that's when I knew. If I didn't know before, I certainly knew that day. This is one sick individual. When you hear her laughing at Colby and him saying, "Why are you laughing?" When you hear her say all these things, you realize what evil there is inside her. In my opinion, that constant need for narcissistic supply to get her heart going is the motivation behind the sex, power, and money. For Lori, feeding her narcissistic supply is getting harder and harder. She's seen a lot and she's getting hardened. So it takes more to get her going. Let's talk about what narcissistic supply is. I mean, it's meant to feed your ego. Narcissistic supply is a term used in psychology. It refers to any form of attention, positive or negative, that a narcissist craves. In this case, the defendant's decision to represent herself would provide an unparalleled opportunity to be the center of attention. The courtroom, with its intense scrutiny and public interest, is a stage tailor made for a narcissist. The defendant's behavior during her first trial did very little to feed her desire for self serving actions, including grandizing, manipulation, and outright disregard for legal procedures. My guess is she wants to use the courtroom as a platform to showcase her perceived intelligence, wit, and charisma. I do believe that this strategy will backfire, as it has done with so many other serial killers who have tried and failed miserably when representing themselves. My next video will dive into the top 10 serial killers who went this route and represented themselves. Their juries were unimpressed by their self-aggrandizement, however you say it. Anyway, they were all found guilty. But the fact is, most likely they would have been found guilty either way. But at least by representing themselves, there was the opportunity to feed the hungry wolf inside them through the process. There's some interesting stories. Again, that's coming on my next video. It's just crazy what they do. I mean, anyway, okay, that's my next video. To be continued next week. The intense public scrutiny and negative attention, while initially satisfying their narcissistic needs, ultimately can help to lead to a serial killer's downfall. This case highlights the dangers of unchecked narcissism. While every narcissist is not a criminal, I've heard arguments that all serial killers are narcissists. While individuals with narcissism may initially succeed in manipulating others and gaining attention, their lack of empathy and self-awareness often lead to the worst of the worst actions. I believe that Lori's decision to represent herself, while motivated by a desire for narcissistic supply, ultimately will expose her vulnerabilities. Her inability to empathize with the victims' families, coupled with the arrogant demeanor, that will alienate the jury and seal her fate. But my guess is she doesn't care. What does she have to lose? She's going to get narcissistic supply out of it, so it'll all be worth it. Either way, she's got a life without parole. She just wants to fill her tank for that day. Do you think that Lori will be deemed incompetent based on Arizona standards and this case will never move forward? Or do you think that she'll be restored to competency and we'll be seeing her in court? Give me your answers to those two questions. Let me know your thoughts. I'll see you soon. Oh, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this out. And if you ring the bell, you'll be notified when I put up new content. Like this top 10 serial killers who represented themselves, which will be coming out next week. I'll see you soon. See ya.